Recording is on.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Alpesh Doshi from Fintricity. I'm speaking to you from London. Wow. I'm just going to try and bring the video on if it works. I don't know if the video is working. If you can see me as well. There we go. Yes, you can see me. So I'm calling you from London, and I guess you are from anywhere in the world. So it's an amazing change has happened recently where, participating in web conferences is now a global thing at any one time. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a number of different areas around digitization and digital transformation, around blockchain, and also delve a bit more depth into the coming changes around the application of blockchain, and specifically around tokenization. Fintricity as a company, we've been around for many years, more than 15 years as a company. We now work in a number of areas. One is around helping companies change and helping provide solutions. The other one is ventures. We're building ventures around the application of emerging technology, including data and AI. And we help companies through building innovation labs and helping do innovation and change. And then, so my talk is really going to start with looking at innovation with technology. So almost every industry is going to be impacted by technology, and I'm sure most of you who are listening know that already. But I think it has to be said, just because, if an industry hasn't transformed with technology and technology and emerging tech, and I'll talk about some of the technologies as we go through the presentation, will absolutely transform every single industry. With the advent of current, in 2020 and now around coronavirus and the change in the way people have had to work, I see that need accelerating even more, and obviously companies now looking at how they make their change happen sooner rather than later. So I'm going to just start with some background and talk about where we've been and where we're going. So, we've seen multiple industrial revolutions, and you can see the different changes from the mechanical side, from industrial revolution, which everybody knows about, and the third industrial revolution around computing. And we've seen computer systems over the last 30 years change everything. And obviously with the internet and mobiles has also changed everything. Social media has also made a transformation of how people connect and people interact. One of the other biggest things is the open and shared information, global information. That has been a massive change in terms of access to content, access to knowledge and information, access to academia, or access to any kind of information. And we've seen that, and I'm sure most of you who are listening and watching will know that. The next revolution is really we're right at the beginning of the next industrial revolution, which is the fourth, what's called the fourth industrial revolution. And there are some major changes that are going to happen in there, and I just want to highlight some of the key ones, and I'll talk about some of those in the talk. One of the key ones is new business models, and with the advent of blockchain, we'll see decentralized business models, and I'll talk a little bit about that further on. And also new ways of working. Obviously, we're now seeing new ways of working, and actually the acceleration of new ways of working using digital, and mainly working through video conferencing and online collaboration tools. We've seen that transformation amazingly in 2020, in the sort of May 2020, from March to May, June, July 2020. It's been an amazing change. We're also at how the world does business. We're also going to change how people make money. The way people make money is going to change completely. Digitization of every industry is going to transform where the value lies and how revenue is made. One of the other biggest ones is the use of data. And data, I said data is the new oil over 10 years ago, because I've been working in the data space for nearly over 10 years. I didn't come up with the phrase. Gert Lenhart came up with that phrase about over 11 years ago. Gate Lennart is a futurist. And we're still using the phrase data is the new oil. If your company doesn't collect data, use data, organize data, and leverage data across every part of your business, then if you don't change the way you do it, then your company is going to become obsolete in the next few years. And it will absolutely fuel massive improvements in every sector. So what's going to change? You know, it's all obvious. It's how we work, we play, we live, we move around, we socialize, how we make money. All of those things are going to change. And the categories of things that are going to change are driven by a lot of the technologies as I've described to you. So the technology trends, I mean, you've probably seen in some of these trends, obviously blockchain is actually a reasonably early trend. And we've been through at least one cycle of hype and innovation in terms of building new software. But we, you know, in 2019, we sort of went into a trough of actual adoption because of the skepticism of the technology and the fact that it didn't deliver to the hyped business value that people were talking about. But what I see happening is actually that hype is going to change. That hype, you know, we're now seeing blockchain are being applied more sensibly into the market, into the right kind of problems. That's one of the challenges that we've seen over the last few years. The challenges have some of the applications of blockchain haven't really been applied in the right way. So we're going to see a lot of real and proper applications of blockchain in the marketplace. AI, as I'm sure all of you know, AI has been hyped like crazy in the last 5 years, but the whole data stuff has been going on for 10 years, and we've been in the data space for 10 years. But again, you know, we're going through like if you know Gartner's hype cycle and other mechanisms, you always get this initial hype, and then the promise of the delivery of AI has not necessarily happened yet. We're right at the beginning of it, and we'll see a lot of that change emerge with the use of data, with the transformation of business models. Things like robotics, and robotics both concerns physical robots and digital robots through robotic process automation. You know, in companies that have legacy systems going back 10, 20, 30, even 40 years, find it difficult to transform. And RPA, robotic process automation, has seen a lot of adoption because it's easier to integrate the front end rather than trying to integrate the back end, which is what a lot of people have been trying to do. And that's seen quite a lot of change. You know, the market for RPA, robotic process automation, has quintupled in size in 3 years. So you can see the adoption of the sort of frictionless way of using technology like RPA to change business. IoT is another one. You know, we're still right at the beginning of Internet of Things, and how devices are live on the internet, how devices can shed data, push data through, and be able to then use that data to modify the behavior of an activity. So as an example, you know, looking at energy data from buildings, you know, pulling in big data from buildings, being able to then modify the behavior of that building, and then that building sitting in an energy ecosystem, and how that will work. So, you know, we're still right at the beginning of this technology trend. One of the other ones I'd just like to mention is drones. You know, drones are transforming many industries. Agriculture is going to be transformed with drones. We're still, again, at the early days, but being able to have cheap, available drones with computer vision, being able to track and visualize a field of growing of a plant or something is going to transform. But again, we're still at the beginning. You know, all the pieces are now there. A lot of the technology is now maturing, but the implementation and use of that technology is really early. We see it in our work, in the trends, that it's just so early, because you need to provide a solution, and you look at an end-to-end way of delivering a solution. It's not just implementing a technology. It's also about transforming your business model. It's transforming your operating model and how your business functions. As well, and you know, a part of that is also it's taking the technology that some of these technologies into a solution and delivering that change. So technology trends are a lot of the technologies have been around for a long time. Blockchain, as we know, through Bitcoin, has been around since 2009. But the adoption of blockchain in markets, we're under 10% in terms of actual real scaled adoption. And actually, we're not really in scaled adoption. And similarly with other technology, with RPA, with AI. So one of the key things that I always like to say is, the creation and the hype of the technology always lags behind the adoption of that technology into transforming a business model. And there are lots of curves around, lots of graphs around how that's happening. So, we're seeing adoption of lots of things, but as with any trend, it takes time. So one of the key areas is around smart cities. What we're seeing is government intervention around the creation of smart cities. And obviously smart cities encompass a whole suite of things. I mentioned something in the previous slide around smart buildings and smart energy, but that's one of the elements. IoT is, again, putting in IoT into, for example, roads. We're pretty early in the cycle of that. Smart cities take time to create and track. And one of the key things I've seen, just some examples, Saudi Arabia has created a project called NEOM to spend $30 billion in building a smart city on the coast, in the north of Saudi Arabia on the coast. UAE in Abu Dhabi have already created a smart city, and they built a whole area that's intended to be a smart city. And their focus has been on sustainability, making a sustainable city happen. Part of the challenge is going back to what I said earlier about the creation of technology and adoption and implementation of technology. We're still pretty early on that space. Everybody knows about the hype around connected cars and electric cars and self-driving cars. My view is those things really will take a lot longer for people to be satisfied that they will work in an urban environment. Now we're talking 5 to 10 years away, I would say. So again, a lot of the things around smart cities aren't necessarily about the creation of the technology which works. A lot of the challenge is about having a cultural change or having individuals adopt that change. And that's the hardest thing. People are generally resistant to change, and therefore it takes time. Smart medicine has now become prevalent. You can see, video consultations have accelerated in 2020 around because of COVID, and doing home consultations. Now, how would you ever think that was going to happen? Now, what we're going to see as well in smart medicine and smart healthcare is actually, for example, using enhanced cameras that can detect illnesses by watching, by looking at your body temperature, for example. I mean, there's so many different ways that technology that I mentioned already can be applied. So the good thing is that the technology generally exists, but there's still a long way to go in terms of actual adoption to scale in any city around the world. So if we now, the key thing here is to look at outcomes. How do you define an outcome which is practical? So the challenge is always the technology is ahead of the adoption of that technology. The key thing to remember is to focus on an outcome that you can get. So we've seen healthcare change so quickly in the last, in 2020 between March, June, July, August. We'll see massive change going to happen around how healthcare is delivered. We've seen changes in education moving through, that the online education stuff has been around for a long time, but the adoption of it just has not happened. People are very traditional about doing education. Universities are now saying we're going to do all our courses online. So, these kinds of, black swan events force industries to move faster than they would normally do. So, this slide, believe it or not, I put together, this slide's from about 3 years ago. This is not a slide from yesterday. And I'm seeing and showing you this slide because all the pieces here now are even more relevant, and you can see some of these changes starting to happen. Personalized automated learning services, as the example, is going to absolutely happen now. That was going to take, people talked about it. Now education is happening online in countries where you can't physically go into school, or, for example, universities changing the way they deliver their courses. We'll see a massive shift in how education is delivered, and therefore the innovation around that too. One of the things I mentioned with all of those things is data analytics. All of these things will be driven by data analytics and getting that data right, collecting that data, organizing data, using that data across the whole value chain of services and products that people provide. You know, in automotive, it's obvious. In banking, it's obvious. Around credit scoring, connected homes, again, it's obvious. So, you know, think about data in your business and think about what you're doing if you're an entrepreneur. Think about data-driven business models and how data fits as centrally into delivering your new product or service, or a company that's figuring out how data can be used in your business. So I'm going to focus a little bit on real estate and tokenization because you know, blockchain as a term is huge, right? There's so many different applications of blockchain. Not as many as there were in 2017. Okay, you know, when the hype was there, I've just seen so many wrong applications of blockchain. But blockchain is still being used for the wrong thing. But you know, real estate is one of the really real estate and a whole bunch of other ones where tokenization is going to be prevalent and important. So if we talk about today's world of trading of any kind, you know, it's still paper trading, it's still slow, it's still complex, and being able to move money and do trade across borders has not really changed. You know, blockchain may be there, you know, banks have been trying to move money across the world, but the reality is we haven't really penetrated any kind of scale of adoption of digital trade. And real estate is one of these other things where the real estate market, frankly, has not changed in hundreds of years. How you buy, sell assets, how you hold assets has not changed in hundreds of years. So, you know, and so what I'm going to talk about in the next few slides is just about how real estate and property will change. So, the ability for real estate to be tokenized, which is one of the key areas that we're working on. And tokenization really is, in financial services terms, is what's called a structured product. A structured products are generally being used in financial markets for sophisticated financial transactions. But now being able to encapsulate those digitally into what's called a smart contract, that is really going to change the way people buy, sell, hold, invest in real estate assets. And that's one of the biggest changes we'll see, because tokenization enables that. The value chain of tokenization enables that. And it enables the easy transfer of assets. Now, when I say easy, I mean that it can be done digitally. There's a whole bunch of issues around, and friction issues around regulation, around legal stuff and compliance and ownership. So those things have not necessarily been digitized yet, but also not even automated or agreed yet. So countries around the world are still building regulation around tokenization and how tokenization could work in their country, in their jurisdiction around an asset. So it's not just about the technology, it's really about countries adopting the right regulation so that this kind of thing can happen. And that's really been where that's where some of the challenges have been, because regulators and governments are generally slow, compliance is generally slow, legal structures are slow. Adapting legal structures for using new technologies, adapting legal structures where tokenization and the impact of tokenization to legal structures, again, is still only recently in 2020 become solved, but we're still not there completely. So tokenization is already here, but you know, it's in little pieces. The value chain that we've seen around tokenization is trying to build basically islands of tokenization. So companies have basically built their own blockchain to tokenize the assets for themselves, or tokenize anything. You know, we've seen in the last 6 months, the Bank of England in the UK just issued a central bank digital currency report looking at how you can tokenize currencies. But that's taken, I just to give you an example, I presented on central bank digital currency in 2017 through one of the Middle Eastern governments, in the central bank of one of the Middle Eastern governments. That was 3 years ago. So, we're still right at the beginning of banks adopting digital currencies through fiat, and not crypto, but through fiat. Real estate, similarly, we had a stop-start thing. We've seen publicity around the adoption of the creation of tokenization, but the reality is that it's very siloed, it's fragmented. There's no real standardization across the board in terms of how you own an asset, etc. And so we're still right at the beginning. I was talking to somebody about art. Similarly, it's not technologically, it's probably doable. There's still some issues around it, but we're still right at the beginning. So some of the companies that you can see at the bottom that I mentioned are really some of the companies that are looking at it. However, my view is they're already looking at it from a silo perspective, so therefore there's a need of a different approach to solving tokenization. It's a huge market. You can see here, I'm not going to explain to you. Everybody knows real estate is a massive market. It's not a, it's the beauty of a massive market is there'll be tens, if not hundreds of companies who will emerge, who will provide this capability. And my view is that it's going to be from a different kind of business model that we've seen so far. We've seen siloed companies building, tokenizing an asset in their own way for their own blockchain. That's never going to scale. It's never going to scale. We're just seeing the beginnings of asset managers who frankly own large proportions of real estate, in funds, starting to think about what the implications of tokenization would be for them. And if they start adopting it, then we're going to see a massive change reasonably quickly. So why real estate tokenization? It's if we just take what I said earlier about the fact that the real estate industry and how you buy, sell, hold, fund, get income from a real estate asset has not changed in hundreds of years. It's still the same. Yes, there's been innovation around REITs, real estate investment trusts, maybe the last 20 years, and there's been a couple of other innovations. But generally, there really hasn't been a change in terms of how real estate is owned and managed. So, people talk about liquidity. I don't necessarily believe liquidity is the major issue around tokenization of real estate assets. People talk about liquidity unless you have a market and you have a global market with transparency and visibility and exposure of assets in the market, you're not going to get liquidity. If you create a proprietary blockchain and proprietary value chain for your tokenized real estate assets, you're not going to get liquidity because you need to have a large scale, a liquid market and visible market and a trading market to be able to get that liquidity. But what it does do is reduce barriers for investment. So one of the biggest things is asset managers or family offices wanting to invest in real estate assets. For them, it's hard to find assets they want to invest in with the yield they want to invest in. It's really hard to do discovery. Now, that has not changed in hundreds of years. Generally, it's little groups of people who will know each other and say, I've got a real estate asset, do you want to invest in it? And they'll put in $2 or $3 million. But the deal flow is all based upon manual connections between different parties and different networks who will connect to each other. Yes, there are brokers in between. The brokers are the same. They still only see a proportion of the real estate assets that are out there. And so digitizing the value chain of real estate will enable better discovery, better liquidity, better investment opportunities for investors, but also better, quicker financing of real estate assets. So if you want to do a construction project, I mentioned smart cities earlier. So if you wanted to construct a smart city, you could do it in a different way. One of the other aspects is portfolio diversification. So investors are always looking for different elements of risk in terms of what they invest in, how they invest in. So, for example, you might be offered 15% yield on a real estate asset, but the risk is significantly higher. So, therefore, you don't want to put all of your money into one asset. So, what the ability to create a structured product, a token, allows you to do is split those investment opportunities up into different assets, but also aggregate those into a specific portfolio like you would do in a fund, but actually a lot more flexible. The other element is around the transaction complexity. To actually buy a real estate asset across the value chain and custody it and own it and manage the life cycle of that is frankly pretty complex and slow. It takes weeks, if not months, to actually conduct a transaction. Tokenization and smart contracts will frankly change that value chain, and that's where frankly one of the key pillars of making this work is being able to do that.
It's exactly what I want to simplify the verification and explanation of what is the tokenization of real estate. This is exactly what I want to do.
Cool. So this is just an example of looking at a structure, and these are very familiar structures. So if you're looking at a structure for the real estate assets, sorry, my wife just came in. You know, this is a structure that's frankly reasonably common in the traditional world. What you're doing is moving it into the digital world, but you need the gap between real physical assets, the ownership of the assets, tied to a particular vehicle, in this case, or SPV, which is a special purpose vehicle, which legally ties the SPV and the tokens issued by the SPV into the token and the token holder. So unless that value chain is created and it's represented legally in law across border, not just in country, it's very difficult to get people to buy into it, because unless you can say that token is attached to that asset, so if anything happened, like for example the income stream dried up and the SPV and the rental stopped, how does the ownership work? So unless you build these legal structures and compliance structures in multiple jurisdictions, you won't be able to actually own an asset and know that it's that asset. So that's one of the gaps still exists. It's getting there. There's still, you know, some countries have looked at regulation around it, and it's getting there, but it's still not there. It's still not there. There's still some way to go. So what do you need to make it happen? This is one of the key things. You know, what are the pieces? And it isn't just about creating an ERC20 token. A lot of people believe it's just let's create an ERC20 token, and we'll be able to, you know, tokenize an asset. There's a whole bunch of different areas that you have to create. You have to create the ability to have data around the asset, so to identify the asset, to price the asset properly, to get the income stream from the asset. All those things need data. You can't do it without data. You need the ability to exchange the tokens in the asset, and do it in a way which is not proprietary and siloed, because what we're seeing at the moment is these proprietary and siloed companies emerging. The challenge with tokenized real estate is that it's a non-fungible asset, i.e. a fiat asset, which is dollar, sterling, pound. You can exchange £1 for another pound or $1 for another dollar, and it's the same thing. When you're talking about non-fungible assets, you know, one token in a real estate asset is not the same as another token in a real estate asset. They're completely different. How they define it, the price, the ownership, the income stream is all different. So you have to build a different model of how you actually create that token. If you own an asset, if you own the asset digitally, how do you actually make sure from an investor perspective that you have the private key, public key stored securely? So custody of the asset is really, really important, because the custody of the token and the identification of the token and ownership of the asset is key. Now, in the traditional world, custody has been done around shareholdings through asset managers. If you want the man in the street, individuals to custody the asset, there's a whole new industry that emerged around custody of a token, and not just a token of real estate, any kind of token, and being able to access that asset, store it securely, being able to get income from the asset is also really, really a key part. The last one is, you know, how you create a fund. So how you might not be able to afford to buy a whole building in New York and a whole building in Paris and a whole building in London. How do you split that up? Well, you know, the evolution of the fund industry from REITs, real estate investment trusts, etc., and other types of funds to creating funds which are tokenized will enable that. So I won't go through this, but this is just an example of how you would do it. I'm happy to share the slides with you so you can have a look. But some of the key things to look at is yield. What yield do you want? Most real estate investors are interested in yield, which is what is the return do I get and over what time period do I get it? And being able to tokenize that and pay out that income stream is valuable. So in here it says 8% yield, right? If you could create a token which is priced properly and the income can be paid 8% yield paid on a monthly basis over 10 years, hey, that would be great. So that's the mechanics of getting that in place is obviously quite involved. Some of the issues and challenges, I'm an optimist, and I believe this will happen. But some of the key challenges are actually providing the software platform in a way that's not proprietary and closed. So in order to create liquidity, as I said earlier, you need the ability to have wide adoption of fundamentals around a technology stack, which allows plugging into a network, if you like, of assets, real estate assets, or other kind of tokenized assets. I mentioned already around SPVs. The challenge with SPVs at the moment is these legal structures are quite complex. And their costs can be high. In some countries, setting up an SPV is thousands of dollars. It's not cheap. So until the regulation compliance is there and then you can digitize the way you create SPVs, it'll be pretty hard to do that. Regulation is absolutely basic. If you don't have the regulatory environment in the countries in which you are trying to tokenize an asset, then you won't better do it because the regulator will stop you. They'll stop you doing it. And we've seen, to be honest, in the last 3 years, emergence of regulation in many countries. So, in Mauritius, there's been a bunch of regulation in Bermuda, Cayman Islands, Germany, France, UK, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, and a bunch of others who have issued regulation, but they just issued it, literally in the last 6 months. So you're then going to interpret that, encapsulate it in code, make sure you're compliant, and then get the adoption. So that's a whole bunch of work to do. The final piece is around data and security. So one of the challenges around tokenization of a real estate asset is how do you price it? How do you know the price of the asset is what it should be? Therefore, how do you price the token? So one of the things in REITs and investment trusts is that investment trusts, which are real estate investment trusts, is they always trade on a listed exchange about 20% of what's called the net asset value, which is how much the total real estate assets are worth. So if you have tokenization and you can trade those easily, the pricing and the algorithms and how you price the asset changes. So having data to actually be able to price the asset is obviously important. One of the other things is security. You want investors, any kind, whether it's an individual or a fund or a family office or an institutional investor, have security of the fact that they know that that their asset is secure, the ownership of the asset is secure, the income is secure, and that's a whole series of security aspects to consider around that. So going back to the beginning, when I said about the sort of fourth industrial revolution, what I've developed is what I call the connected quadrant, which basically breaks down the changing world into 4 quadrants, which is around the new business models, and I've mentioned some of those business models, new technology models, and we've seen blockchain and data AI and IoT happen there, which most people listening to this will be familiar with. New operating models, now that is absolutely a change that we'll absolutely see. So if you look at the digitally native companies who are smart, they have an agile operating model. It's the obvious ones: Facebook, LinkedIn, Airbnb, Google, and lots of others who are smart about being able to innovate quickly, develop ideas, get them implemented fast, and keeping iterating on that change. Most companies in today's world don't do that. They're very slow in change. If you wanted to release a product, it takes anywhere from 6 months to 2 years to actually develop and deploy and put a product live. Unless an organization changes the way they do that, they frankly will over time be out of business. Things like collaborative models globally, that's changed. Look where we are. the whole collaborations change has actually happened faster, and I think we'll see it accelerated in the next few years because of what's happened. New market models have already emerged. So if you don't know Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z.com, they just released the top 100 marketplaces. And if you go there and check the top 100 marketplaces, you'll be surprised when you look at the brands, you go, oh, that's a marketplace, is it? You know, and again, we're right at the early days of marketplace models. And if your industry, whether it's B2B or B2C, think about how you build a marketplace model, research the existing marketplaces and think about what that happens and how your business could change with those marketplace models. Decentralization is absolutely going to fundamentally change how you deliver marketplace models. Rather than a centralized hub, you're going to have nodes in a network. Those networks connect together into build a marketplace, and then trading will happen through that. So, you know, the connected quadrant, most importantly, you pick pieces out the different parts of the model and you compose them into your business strategy. I think that's it. I think hopefully that's given you a flavor around actually taking you across the landscape from Internet of Things and the use of technology all the way to a little bit of deep dive into tokenization in real estate, all the way looking at your business models and how you can transform. What are the composition of the, I mentioned the connected quadrant, what are the composition of how you transform your business? And you know, we've got exciting times ahead. I think some of the things, and obviously the entrepreneurs out there, you know, the world is wide open. Go for it, man. Go for creating your new business.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you're right, Alpesh. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm very glad to have you on board from the UK.
Thank you, Mark.
We are a pioneer and early presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Are we having questions or are we just moving on?
I don't know yet. Julien, tu as des questions au cas où? I think it's a very clear explanation of what your real estate is doing, what is the new technology is doing, how will this smart technology doing. So I think it's great for us. Great content.
Cool. If there's no questions, then my details are on the screen. I'll try and come on to the party later on. Looking forward to it. I've never been to a virtual party with 3D before, so that's going to be an experience.
For us, it's the same time. It's just the new beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. This is a new world. This is the new normal, right? A virtual party with hundreds of people, thousands of people across the world through a virtual world. This is.
But, should we stop the record?
There's a question mark. Anybody have a question?
Yes, but sorry. I have one question, please.
Yes, go ahead.
How you combine blockchain and AI?
I'm sorry.
How you combine the
okay.
blockchain? Yeah, combine the blockchain and the AI.
AI. So, you know, I mentioned in the talk the blockchain. A lot of blockchain stuff is about data, right?
Yeah.
And the interpretation of data into building new models and new pricing models. So, as an example, to be able to price a tokenized asset which sits on a blockchain, you need AI to do it. How do you price an asset properly? Which involves data, which involves models and algorithms, which involves trading, which sits on a blockchain. So you're combining blockchain and AI there as one example.
This is the good example of what's going on about this new token economy. Okay, you create services, you create tools, you create a different IA services and different kind of blockchain services. This is the next future and the next business, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah.
What?
Does that make sense? Drop me a line, no problem. If you want some more, I can give you many more examples. There's many examples. Primarily, blockchain doesn't work without data. Unless you've got data across the stack in many different applications of data, then you can't. Blockchain is not useful, frankly.
Exactly, and with this new money program money,
Yeah,
definitely, and with the smart contract, I think is a huge opportunity to involve in this new industry and sector, because regarding this real estate, regarding this new software service or a web service is going to be huge. We must connect it.
absolutely.
And do you also use the AutoML?
Yeah, so machine learning is part of AI, right? So absolutely. So I mean, I'll